go back one. This is the title of tonight's presentation, and it's meant to be a head-scratching, but ultimately paradigm-shifting title, because ironically, understanding that the dollar is as sound as it ever was, and that it is the Federal Reserve note that is sinking, and rightfully so, is key to shifting your paradigm and understanding so many things, but also understanding a way forward out of the shipwreck. And I hope this makes sense as we go on. Is that too small for people? I guess if it is, there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, move up. If that's just too small, then move up. Let's try how this advancing works. There's a fascinating story behind this AI image that I can't tell tonight. But come back and ask me about it later. If you look in this sinking ship, it's got a big gash down the side, huge storms going, it's down at the stern, the sea level is about to overcome the stern, and you know what happens then? It goes down in the whirl. If you can't see on the forecastle here, the little booth with the idol is the Eccles Building. Who knows what the Eccles Building is? Eccles Building is the headquarters of the Federal Reserve. It stands at 20th Street and Constitution Avenue, and it is the most important reason why we and almost everyone in the world is working like crazy and barely subsisting. The motto that we've placed there before the idol that these rowers are desperately rowing and looking at is Fortuna ex nihilo. The motto is wealth from nothing. And if you know anything about the entire Federal Reserve System, or if you know anything about banking, and if you know anything about central banking, that is the fundamental principle. It's really wealth by stealing, but by way of pretending wealth from nothing. So we hear everywhere, including from your friend, such and we read in all our prints, anytime when you read where somebody knows something about money, oh no, the dollar has lost 97% of its value since 1913. De-dollarization, what happens if the dollar loses reserve currency status? $100 in 1913 is worth $3,184.86 today. All these rightfully alarming descriptions of what's happening, but they're all wrong in one respect. They all refer to the dollar in stating that it's the dollar that is about to shipwreck. Well, no, that's because the evil that besets us has usurped the title, the rightful title of the cure. And the cure is the actual dollar of the United States, which none of us uses but ought to use in saving and commerce and everything else. Yes, we are in a dire calamity. This shipwreck of fractional reserve banking and central banking the world over is about to immerse the entire world almost in subsistence, bare subsistence for the foreseeable future. But it ain't the dollar's fault. It's the Federal Reserve note's fault and the fault of fractional reserve banking. That's very important to understand, and the challenge is to escape our misapprehensions. If we have misapprehensions everywhere, probably in no area do we have more misapprehensions that have been inculcated since we could first read or hear a teacher. In no area, perhaps, are there more misapprehensions than in the area of money. But that's remediable. This is a wonderful quote, and I'm going to read it to you because it's probably too small for you to read it. And I apologize. I thought we'd have maybe a bigger screen. Who knows who the Abbé de Condillac was? He's one of the greatest intellects of the of the French Enlightenment before the French Revolution. Believe it or not, there were one or two sound thinkers and sound souls that were part of the French Enlightenment. It's only the confused ones and debauched ones that had any effect, and that's why the French Revolution ushered in 200 years of blood and horror and tyranny. But there were a couple French thinkers who were very sound. I saw you had a copy of Bastiat's The Law. one of the few sound French thinkers on civics. Another was the Abbé Condillac, and civics wasn't his primary thing. This is in one of the primary works of the history of chemistry, written by the Abbé de Condillac. And he observed for his readership that our problem is beginning with not understanding terms or not understanding how we use terms and using them in inconsistent, confusing ways. He said, instead of applying observation to the things we wish to know, so instead of observation, we have chosen rather to imagine them. Advancing from one ill-founded supposition to another, we have at last bewildered ourselves amid a multitude of errors. These errors becoming prejudices, in other words, in unconscious assumptions, are of course adopted as principles, and we thus bewilder ourselves more and more. The method, too, by which we conduct our reasonings is absurd. We abuse words which we do not understand, and call this the art of reasoning. When matters have been brought to this length, when errors have been thus accumulated, there is but one remedy by which order can be restored to the faculty of thinking. This is to forget all that we have learned, to trace back our ideas to their source, to follow the train in which they rise, and to frame the human understanding anew. We abuse words which we do not understand and call this the art of reasoning. That's our fundamental problem when it comes to this subject. Quite intentionally, from the time we were children, almost everything we've read or heard, even by the most well-meaning, begins with wrong terms and misapprehensions multiplied upon misapprehensions. In the short time we have today, we're going to try to disabuse ourselves of or escape or disentangle ourselves from some of those misconceptions. It's very interesting to me that in any economics course, in any economics major, in any economics book, anywhere, almost anywhere in the Western world, with one important exception, it seems that economists try to discover and apply the laws of economics to every economic phenomenon except money. There's only one main exception to that, and that's what's called the Austrian School of Economics. I heard Frank referring to the Mises Institute. The von Mises Institute in Alabama is the intellectual center in America of Austrian economics. And the Austrian school is the only school of economics that understands that the basic principles of economics apply to money just as well as they do to wages and prices and every other economic phenomenon. They're also the only school that understands how money works. So that's a happy exception to that. It's also interesting to note that as lawless as our political existence is, as widely as is regretted that our Constitution poses no credible threat to the actual form of misrule and tyranny under which we live, even if that's true, and it widely is, in every area of our Constitution, for every clause of our Constitution, you may find at least one scholar patriot, sometimes many, who are fearlessly and tirelessly and eloquently and articulately explaining the utter lawlessness of everything that our general government does and the glaring defects of our jurisprudence regarding it. But there's one exception. There's nobody almost who does the same for money, as though our Constitution had nothing to say about money. Well, in fact, it does. There is one happy exception to that, and I will refer to him later. He is the author of the standard work on money and our Constitution, and that will be the standard work hundreds of years from now. It's sad to say that, with the exception of many folks, and I've noticed John Birch Society audiences are always very educated, but most Americans have never opened their Constitution and have very little understanding of it, and that's a calamity beyond measure. But when it comes to money especially, money and militia, probably two of the most important facets of our constitutional order, there is more ignorance on those two subjects than on any others. Even those who were patriotic and pretty well informed about our civic order probably usually know more about the surface of Mars than they do about money in our Constitution and our militia institutions. And that's tragic, but it's eminently remediable. All we need to do is memorize the words of the few, there's only about 5 or 6 monetary clauses in the entire Constitution. Memorize those, then understand the words, because as I'll show you later, the principles, institutions carried over, our Constitution has many instances of a concept or a principle or an institution that's carried over from before the Constitution. For example, the state of Georgia existed as long as we were a state, as long as we were the United States, from 1776 until we created our Constitution. The concept of due process of law, the concept of jury trial. Those are not new things invented in our Constitution. They were things that existed long before and were deliberately carried over. On the other hand, our Constitution does create some things from scratch, de novo, such as our Congress. Even though we had a Congress before, the Congress under our Constitution is quite unlike the Constitution, the Congress under the Articles of Confederation and before the Articles. Powers and organization are so, because of that, the Constitution spends half of its volume, half of its text explaining the Congress because it's so de novo. And our presidency, we had a president before, but not at all like the president we have now, so it spends quite a lot of ink describing the presidency and the powers and limitations. So those things that are de novo creations of our Constitution, we spend a lot of time explaining what they meant and how they work. But there are many things in our Constitution that we simply carried over, and so we don't define them in our Constitution. To understand them, what they are, you have to look at several hundred years of Anglo-American civic and constitutional history, and that's certainly the case for money. In our half a dozen monetary clauses, there are lots of terms and lots of phrases that have a special meaning that is not explained anywhere in the text, but because it was known to all of us when we created the Constitution. And the way for us who are post-literate America to rediscover that is to read the acts going back, several hundred years and see the consistent use of those terms. Then all we need to do is explore the implications of each word in the monetary clauses of our Constitution in connection with each other word and with each other clause and in connection with the Constitution as a whole, because it is a self-consistent whole. So I'm just going to zip through and show you how few are the monetary clauses of the Constitution. First, in Article 1, Section 8, we have powers given to Congress, monetary powers. Borrow money on the credit of the United States, coin money, regulate the value thereof in a foreign coin, provide for the punishment of provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States, and finally to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. In Article 1, Section 9, we have a limitation on certain acts that Congress can pass to prohibit or slow down the slave trade. Well, the last part, and the part that's important for us, is a tax or duty may be imposed on the importation of every such person, not exceeding $10 for each person. The reason that's there is to show you that in our Constitution, we carried over the dollar of the United States that we had before that. That's important to know. It's not de novo. The Constitution doesn't create the dollar. It permanentizes the use of the dollar, and there's one other place where it does that. Article 1, Section 10, we learned that there are limitations placed on the states with regards to money, and one reserved power that's very important to this entire presentation. No state shall coin money. No state shall emit bills of credit. No state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. But you see what's hiding in there? An explicit reservation to every state of the power to make legal tender laws, and at the same time, a restriction saying states can make nothing but gold and silver coin a payment in debts. And finally, in Amendment 7, again, the it's all about suits and juries in suits at common law, but it says if the value in controversy exceeds $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved. What that's saying again is, hello, we Americans continue the dollar as our national unit of account, just as we had in 1780 and in 1777 and in 1776. And in fact, if you study this, you'll learn that the dollar was one of two major units of account in America since long before there was a United States. That's important to know. So, again, the thing to know, if you are about to memorize and understand the monetary clauses of the United States, and it's not that hard, just know there are no de novo creations. Nothing created from scratch. Every term in there, every concept in the term has been familiar to us for decades and in some cases hundreds of years. But since we've had 100 years of public school, we have to rediscover those by reading texts of the law texts of the time and going back. Or we can all read the standard work on the subject, which I will introduce partway through this. So that's the problem. You keep using that word. You keep telling me the dollar is sinking. Well, no, the dollar is not sinking. The dollar is just fine. The Federal Reserve note is sinking. You keep talking about the gold standard. Well, the Constitution nowhere mentions a gold standard. It does make only gold and silver coin the coinage, the currency of the United States, and it does do some other things, but as you learned it in school, every bill must be backed by gold or silver. Well, no, those bills aren't even allowed under our Constitution. Okay? So we need to learn, and it can't be done in a night. To explore each of these definitions would be about a 6-hour lecture, but I'm just illustrating how many terms and phrases one needs to investigate. What does that mean? What is money when the Constitution says money? What is the credit of the United States when it says credit of the United States? Says it, for instance, I just watched a lecture last night by a wonderful historian who's written a history of banking and slavery in America. Really great book. And one of the things she addressed was how in states where the law presumed to accept the monstrosity that you owned Tom and you owned Sally, well, you could mortgage Tom and Sally as collateral, and the legal and financial history of that. Well, does credit of the United States mean that if the United States borrows money, it can take as collateral each of Kirk's children? No. It's the credit of the United States, not the credit of any citizen of the United States, not human chattel. But in fact, some of you may know, every child born in the United States, unless the mother and father are wise enough to escape it, is at birth put down as collateral to the Federal Reserve. His life, his entire life and body and everything he creates is at birth, as soon as his name is connected with his Social Security number, that's recorded as collateral. Okay, that's not lawful under our Constitution. Isn't that wonderful? But it's what happens. That's what I'm talking about. There's pledged collateral. Real estate, that's things that don't move. Chattel, that's cattle, and in the case of a slave society, human beings, or things that can be moved off of your property. Okay? These are two distinct things. One is allowable by the Constitution of the United States, one is not allowable, but you need to understand the difference between those. What does it mean to, or what is meant by, the value of money coined? Does that mean Congress has the power to determine how much its coin will buy? No, it has a very specific meaning. It means to state very clearly what every coin will be accepted at in comparison to the dollar standard, which is a physical coin of silver of a stated weight and fineness. That's the dollar. So when Congress has power to coin money, it coins dollars, it coins gold eagles, and it regulates their value against the dollar. How many of these does it take to equal a dollar in your paying the government, or in paying taxes, or the government paying you? How many Spanish florins and how many Austrian shillings does it take to equal 1 American silver dollar as far as receiving taxes or paying out monies, okay? What is meant by securities? What is meant by credit? We can't describe all these, but these are things that you must understand the specific constitutional meaning of each of these things for you to begin to understand what is our monetary constitutional order. What is a bill of credit? You know that states are deliberately forbidden to emit bills of credit. Well, what is a bill of credit? Got to know that. How is it different from a security? Got to know that. And that's all very easily known by reading the statutes. What does it mean to make a thing a tender in payment of debts? Is it to tender a thing? So if the state pays a thing for services, is it tendering that thing? Or the easier definition, does it mean making laws that say when the court exacts judgments or when two people are suing each other because one person said we had a contract and you didn't fulfill it, laws that say you must accept this note instead of the real thing, that's a legal tender law. And our Constitution says, no, you can't do that. Nothing but gold and silver coin can you insist that people take as the real thing. Okay, I promised to introduce the world authority on this subject. Edwin Vieira is a friend of mine, but he happens to be the world authority on two of what I consider the most important and most greatly neglected aspects of our constitutional order. One is what our Constitution has to say about money, and the other is, Frank's heard me lecture on this before, what our Constitution has to say about our militia institutions. Those two vitally important subjects about which most Americans know almost nothing but know a whole lot of wrong things. Well, this man has written the standard work on both subjects. You'll see that he's a 4-time recovering Harvard graduate. I used to introduce him as that until he corrected me. He said, no, I'm not recovering. I never drank the Kool-Aid, because his AB, his bachelor's, and his master's were in chemistry. So he learned to think in a disciplined way and use his terms consistently and spot BS when he saw it. So that by the time he got his PhD and his law degree there, he was already immune to the Kool-Aid. It didn't even infect him. This is the standard work on the subject of, again, after you memorize the pertinent clauses of the Constitution. Again, very easy. There's only 5 or 6 of them. And then you go through this book and you will learn the specific usage of all of those terms and phrases, how they were used in the Constitution. It's how they had been used for decades and in some cases hundreds of years with regards to money. It is 1,700 pages of law school text, so it's not a light read on the beach. There are 6,500 footnotes and citations. But I will say that the erudition, the crystalline prose, and the Prussian thoroughness, if you know that phrase, are something you won't see. I'm very well read. I've never encountered it in anybody older than the 19th century. We're simply not as literate as we were 100 or 200 years ago, and that's easy to demonstrate. And I predict confidently, with no qualms whatsoever, it will be the standard work well into the millennium. Hundreds of years after our Lord has returned to reign in glory, it will still be the standard work on this subject. Mastering it, and I'm challenging you to do that, will be one of the greatest intellectual challenges of your life. But it will be such a life-changing, thrilling intellectual adventure. And you will understand finally so many things about money in the Constitution, and you will have the wherewithal to be a force for restoring constitutional money in our states and counties, and by doing that, eventually throughout our country. Okay, so Constitution is all about granting powers and imposing liabilities on governing officers, right? That's what the Constitution is all about. So, and we know in our wonderful federal structure, we have a general government and we have 50 state governments, and they're different. And under our federal system, we deliberately confer a very small package of powers on our general government, don't we? And we leave the states to exercise any power they want to if the people of those states will grant it in the state constitution, right? So what many monetary powers does the Constitution grant to the general government? Well, we cited some of them before. Borrow money on the credit of the United States, coin money, and that encompasses several things. You could create a new coin. We did that. We created the gold eagle. That had never existed before. Or we could adopt an existing coin, the dollar. We did that. And instead of the Spanish stamp, now we put the US stamp on it, but it's the exact same weight and fineness. Define the weight and fineness of a new or existing coin. We did that. We've done that all throughout our history according to this constitutional power, beginning with the Mintage Act of 1792. Or we issue or strike a new or existing coin according to this standard you've defined. And we've done that for all of our history. Okay, the power to regulate the value of United States coin, that's coin that's created by Congress. That means to take the US gold eagle and say it takes one of these gold eagles to equal this many of US dollars, which is again a silver coin of 371 1/4 grains and nothing else. Never has been anything else. To fix the standard of weights and measures is a related power, and you can see how. Okay, and foreign coins. From our very start, we invited foreigners who were trading here to pay their duties and imposts at the wharf in whatever coin they brought. It might have been a Swedish krona, it might have been a Spanish florин, it might have been an Austrian shilling, it might have been a German mark, depends on what country you come from. So we, the United States, domesticated not all the coins, but quite a few coins of the world by Congress using its power here and saying, this many of that we will accept in lieu of one American constitutional silver dollar, or this many, American silver dollars. We've done that from the very start. That's what it means to regulate the value of these. What monetary powers does the Constitution grant to the general government? Continued, well, to declare what money it will accept. Who remembers Andrew Jackson and the Treasury Specie Circular in, what was it, 1836? Okay, Congress had passed a law saying as we settle this country, if you want to buy lands that all of us now own, because we got them all by treaty together, but you, Johnny the farmer, and Alice's wife want to settle this, well, you have to pay us a fee, because after all, it was all of our blood and treasure that made it all of ours in the first place. Well, the law said we'll accept American silver dollars, or we'll accept gold eagles. That's what we'll accept. We won't accept notes, bank notes, promising this, because the promise is only as good as the integrity of the issuer of the promise. That's what the law said. But we winked at that for a while until Andrew Jackson was president and told the treasurer, no, issue a circular. Say, you're going to accept only the real thing. Okay? So Congress has that power to do, Congress and the president can do that, to issue securities. A security is what the government issues when it borrows money. When I borrow money, I create a security with the lender saying, I will pay this back, and these are the terms, and if you want collateral, this is the collateral. That's what a security is. It's evidence of debt. It's not money. Okay? It's not a bill of credit, because it's not meant to circulate from hand to hand. It's paid to a certain person or promised to a certain person. Provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities. That's a power given to Congress. So we can punish people. We can make laws punishing people who counterfeit the bonds of the United States, the securities of the United States, and the current coin of the United States. We can, again, make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying those into execution. What monetary powers does the Constitution grant to the state governments? None. Why? Again, under our federalist structure, they already have all the powers imaginable that their citizens of their respective state happen to give them in their constitutions. What monetary powers does the Constitution acknowledge? In other words, as somehow already existing? None. Our general government can do nothing but what we specifically tell it can do. Okay? In the several state governments, our Constitution acknowledges that the states have the power to make legal tender laws, to make laws enforcing contracts, and all other just powers that the people of that state might decide to give them. What monetary powers does the Constitution acknowledge in you and me as individual citizens? Any and all lawful monetary powers. There we go. Disabilities. What disabilities does our Constitution impose? Our Constitution imposes all of these disabilities on the general government. Our general government may not lawfully do any of those things. It does about 2/3 of them on a regular basis, and that's why we're all poor. But it's not allowed to. Okay? A Federal Reserve note, by the way, is a bill of credit. That was hotly debated in the convention, and there were a couple of people who argued for it, but most argued against it. And Luther Martin, who was the leading advocate for it, wrote very eloquently after the fact saying, I gave it my best argument, but it was soundly defeated. So there's no power to do that. No power to charter a bank. Where does the Federal Reserve system come from? From the United States government chartering 12 banks. Not allowed to charter any bank or any corporation. The Federal Reserve Act, and this is the key to why people confuse Federal Reserve notes with dollars. The Federal Reserve Act unlawfully declares that the notes of the 12 private banks of the Federal Reserve System, even though they're notes of private parties who are making a private profit on it, making gain on it, those notes are the obligations of the United States. So whenever you owe $1 to the United States is in the uncomfortable position of accepting in lieu thereof a Federal Reserve note to $1, even though the Treasury knows it'll never get $1 for that. Nobody ever will get $1 for that. But since it has declared unlawfully, since Congress has declared unlawfully that the notes of the Federal Reserve System are obligations of the United States, if you owe the United States $1, the United States is in the uncomfortable position of saying, I'll take a Federal Reserve note because I've said that's my obligation. That's why they circulate. That's why people take them, because they know they have to pay taxes some days. What monetary disabilities does the Constitution impose on the several state governments? Specifically disallows them from coining money, specifically disallows them from emitting bills of credit, and specifically disallows them from making anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, and specifically disallows them to pass any law that impairs the obligation of contracts. What disabilities does the monetary disabilities does our Constitution impose on you and me? None. Because we are the sovereigns. Why is it not advancing? Did I not click it right? There we go. So it's important to understand, and you will understand that when you've taken at least one turn through Edwin's book. I've been making a painstaking tour of it, and on my second tour now, copiously annotating it for a couple of years, because it is a heavy work to undo all the misunderstanding that you have. Yes, this is the calamity that almost everything monetarily that our general government does, and that our state governments do, is unlawful and has a lot of terrible consequences. But is there any good news? There is. Because even though everything that Congress has done with regards to money, and that means everything, since 1913, it's not true. There are exceptions. It has done a few lawful things. The entire Federal Reserve System, every aspect of it is grossly unlawful. But there are a couple imaginable constitutional monetary sins that Congress could have committed that it never has committed. Congress has never committed the sin of calling the Federal Reserve note $1. Congress has never committed the sin of calling a Federal Reserve note the monetary unit of account or the monetary unit of the United States. Consistently from the start, Congress has correctly and lawfully declared that the dollar, a silver coin of 371 1/4 grains, is the dollar and is the unit of account of the United States and is the monetary unit of the accounts. That is a very important fact. What is the United States dollar? Because again, we're all accustomed to thinking that one of these things might be $1. Don't we say that in everyday talk? Every day, hey, give me $1. What do we give? We give a Federal Reserve note that promises $1 that will never be fulfilled. Okay? Or we write a check. I promise you $1. Or we have a national bank that issues a note for $1. Okay? Those were once honored. But again, it's unlawful for the general government to have anything to do with them as far as sponsoring them or chartering them. That's the dollar of the United States. Always has been. A silver coin of 371 1/4 grains. And the reason we know it weighs that. This is the first dollar. It was issued in the 1600s by Count Joachim von Joachimsthal, a German state when there were many German states. And it was so wonderful and everyone loved it so much that the Spanish, Ferdinand and Isabella, they started imitating, and other kingdoms around the world and other countries around the world started issuing their own dollars because this one had a reputation for integrity. So guess what? In America, beginning in 1707, Americans had been using dollars so much, and they used pounds and they used dollars. They used pounds and they used dollars. But they used the dollar eventually more than they used the pound, that the then reigning English king said, by golly, I need to decree a decree saying how many pounds and how many guineas and how many everything else's in the world are worth $1. So she did that, and then Parliament followed up by reinforcing that. Days after independence, Congress started making that dollar officially what it already had been unofficially in America from before there was a United States, the dollar. And sooner or later, some of them said, well, some of them are worn down. What is the real weight and fineness of a dollar? Well, again, under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5 of the Constitution, one of the first things that our new Congress under the Constitution did in the Mint Act of 1792 was, well, let's just weigh tens of thousands of dollars from New Hampshire to Georgia, northern ones, middle ones, southern ones, and let's average them out. And so they, by law, in 1792 said the average weight and fineness of all of the ones that we're using now and have been using forever happens to be 371 1/4 grains of fine silver. And that's the permanent definition of the dollar that has been our dollar since long before we had a country. So where lies safety before the calamity that certainly your guest and your friend or whoever it is and everybody else knows is about to befall us? If it's the wrong name, he gives the calamity the name of the dollar is sinking. Well, that's the wrong name, but certainly the economy of the entire world is about to sink because of the idol at the forecastle of that ship, the Federal Reserve System. Well, the answer is to jump back into, not out of, the dollar. To jump out of the Federal Reserve note back into the actual dollar. That's the answer. But we can't get our minds around that until we get our terms right. And we start undoing a lifetime of misusing terms. That's hard to do, but it can be done. Oh, this slide is not going to work, and it's too bad because it's too small to read. I'll have to read it for you. This is actually a 2-page spreadsheet comparing various alternatives. The one is the alternative that most of us use and much of the world uses right now. It's a Federal Reserve note. And here are its qualities. Is it seaworthy? Nope, that's the problem your friend's talking about. Okay? They keep printing trillions more every year, and so of course every one is worth less than it was the day before. Is it proven in commerce and savings? It was for several decades. People used it very effectively in commerce and savings, but every year now that becomes less safe because its value becoming such a thing in flux, it's less useful every year in commerce and savings. Is it widely taken for the monetary unit of the United States? Yep, and that's the problem. Because we all confuse it with the real thing, that's why we have so many problems. Is it legal tender by statute? Well, sort of. Again, by statute, the Unlawful Federal Reserve Act calls it an obligation of the United States, even though it's not issued by the United States. It's issued by private banks, and fraudulently so. But because Congress has unlawfully called it an obligation, anytime you have a debt in a dollar to the United States, you can pay that, which I'd much rather do because it ain't worth nothing, than pay in a real dollar. Is it the monetary unit of the United States by the Constitution? Never has been. Is it the monetary unit of the United States by statute? Never has been. Never been a statute that called it a dollar or the monetary unit of the United States. Has Congress ever regulated the value of other coins with reference to it? Nope, never. Okay? Now here are the other alternatives. You notice since the ship's been going down, a lot of people have been hastily building life rafts or lifeboats on the fantail of the sinking ship. Who remembers the Liberty Dollar of Bernard von Nothaus? Remember that? Yeah, but we bought some. Okay, that was the first big lifeboat that he issued. He created it. It was honest, it was seaworthy, had all the great qualities of money. Okay. Was it seaworthy? Yes. Was it useful in commerce and trade and savings? Yeah, to a significant degree, depending on how many people used it. Was it the monetary unit of the United States by the Constitution or by the statute? Nope, Nope, never was. Did Congress ever measure anything else against it in officially deciding what coins to accept from other? Nope, never did. Okay, since more recent times, people have invented Bitcoin and a host of other cryptocurrencies. And they're wonderful, again, because they're honest and seaworthy, and that makes them really useful. But, okay, has any of those ever widely been taken in popular assumptions for the monetary unit? Nope, never has. Is it legal tender by any statute? Nope. Is it the monetary unit of the United States by constitution or statute? Nope, never has been. Has Congress ever regulated the value of any other coin against it? Nope, never has. And this is supposed to be an Ethereum, but that's to represent all the others. I don't know, are there hundreds of cryptocurrencies? Again, all the ones I know about, they're honest and they're seaworthy, and that's why people like them. But no one thinks that they're the monetary unit of the United States, and no statute has ever pretended to call them legal tender, and Constitution and statute have never made them the monetary unit of the United States, and Congress has never regulated anything against their standard. There's something in Utah and now some other states called goldbacks. Who's seen a goldback or owned a goldback? They're wonderful, they're honest, and they're seaworthy. It's piece of gold impregnated in some beautiful polymer film with beautiful designs on it. But has anyone ever taken it for the monetary unit of the United States? No, not about to happen. Is it legal tender by any statute? No. Has the Constitution or statute ever made it the monetary unit of account of the United States? No. Has Congress ever measured or valued any other currency or coin of the world against it? No. But the dollar of the United States, the answers are different. Is it seaworthy? Is it honest? Is it seaworthy? Yup. Is it proven in economic counsel? Yes, and for over 100 years, a longer trial. Okay. Is it legal tender by statute? Yes, always has been, since before we had a country. Is it the monetary unit of the United States by either the Constitution or by statute? Yes, always has been. Has Congress ever regulated other coins against it? Yep, that's the only thing Congress has ever regulated coins against. So the reason for that is I want to maintain that the ultimate alternative currency, everybody trying to create alternative currencies because everybody knows the Federal Reserve note is doomed because it's a fraud, well, they all have great qualities. But none of them has as many wonderful qualities as the actual dollar. So in this case, I'm proposing as alternative, go back to the real thing. And this is the most important reason. You have noticed by now when Notehouse created his Liberty Dollar, when Nakamoto created his Bitcoin, when everybody's created any alternative currency, if it was honest and seaworthy for that reason alone, our Treasury, our Department of Justice, our Federal Reserve System has attacked it ruthlessly, lawlessly, relentlessly, because it's an intolerable competition to the fraud, to the racket. So, wouldn't it be nice if there were an alternate currency, an alternative that were some way more impregnable, more protected against these lawless attacks? Well, I'm here to say that the actual dollar and the fact that we have a federalist system gives some wonderful protection, some wonderful degrees of impregnability to the actual dollar. One, there's federalism, and two, in combination with federalism, there's the fact that the real dollar is the real dollar, constitutionally, statutorily, historically, and all those other ways that we showed in that spreadsheet. That's an important thing. You remember the 10th Amendment says general government can't do nothing but what we give it, right? Everything else is reserved to the states. Okay, well, I also quoted to you that Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 expressly reserves legal tender powers to Utah, to Idaho, to Missouri, to Arkansas. And we pointed out that the same clause expressly prohibits any of those states from exercising that legal tender power to make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in debt. That gives a network, a nest, a basket, an interwoven basket of protections against the inevitable attacks that if a large amount of people start circulating the real dollar, there will be determined attacks from the DOJ, from the Department of Treasury, from the Federal Reserve, and all of their twins around the world, because that's a life threat to the very existence of the fraud. But these things are a list of protections that no other alternative can enjoy. It is the unit of account since before we had a country even. It is expressly carried over as such in 2 places in our Constitution. Its weight and fineness are known. They've been defined by statute since 1792. Its history, it's been minted to that defined standard, since the beginning. And Congress has a history of regulating the value of everything else against it because it's the standard. That gives a lot of impregnability. All those things are kind of like a rebuke to legislators in Congress, to judges on federal benches who wish to find some devious way to prevent Americans from returning to their actual dollar. We can tell them, don't complain that there's an alternative currency threatening the real thing. No, this is the real thing threatening the phony alternative. Okay, this is the original and still is the unit of account of the United States by Constitution and statute. So there are layers and layers of protections against mischief. Okay, now, what can your state legislature do right now? What can your county council do right now? There are tons of things they can do right now. If they understand the basics, you can help them write legislation, and if it's written correctly, to circulate the actual dollar of the United States. We talked about currency. Currency is called currency because it's circulated current. If no one circulates it anymore, it's not current. Would you say that the real dollar of the United States is very current today? No. Almost no one uses it. The Constitution Party of Cache County does. We accept it in dues. But hardly anyone ever uses it. But state legislatures can begin by standing expressly on the Constitution and statute, recognizing its legal tender status. By the way, Utah did this in 2011 and 2012, and that literally drew people from around the world as what's the word? Mild as the statute, as timid as the statute was. It drew people from as far away as China to come and see, what in the heck are those Utahns doing? Does Idaho have something like that in the last several years of a legal tender statute? Other states are following suit, and they all begin by stating, wait, the Constitution says we've reserved to us the power, legal tender powers. It also tells us we may not exercise that with regard to anything but gold and silver coin. There are gold and silver coins issued under congressional command and have been all the time and still are today, and they're legal tender and called such by statute. Well, we in this state are going to do this and that and the other to encourage people to use them for what they were created for. Utah's is so far the most advanced statute, but it has a long way to go. But the principles of writing a good statute are: you must, in your language of your statute, begin by standing expressly on the Constitution and statute. You must expressly claim in your legislation that, hey, this is a power reserved to us explicitly and we're exercising it. We no longer want to, at least in this and that case, accept Federal Reserve notes or anything else. We want to accept real dollars. Or we're no longer going to pay out such and such and such, including Federal Reserve notes. We're going to pay out real dollars. Expressly confess their guilt in being complicitous in the past, either by failing in their judiciary acts to prohibit the courts from saying this debt is discharged when the payer has not paid $1, he's paid something else, unless the plaintiff agrees, and by tendering themselves. States admit that, hey, we as a state have been guilty for a long time in tendering and in receiving Federal Reserve notes, even though the Constitution makes it very explicit what we have to accept and tender. So, acknowledging their guilt right now and acknowledging an intent to repent before the Constitution of that state in the United States. So the point is, jump out of the Federal Reserve note back into the dollar. This really, we could speak for hours and go into detail, but I've already gone a while, so let's open it up to questions and answers. Yes, sir.
What was the Continental and how was it issued?
Okay, the Continental usually refers to a continental note. Yeah. Congress issued probably 20 times, and other states had done that before, notes promising dollars. Sometimes they'd even issued notes promising pounds, but usually, because from the beginning of independence, we realize the dollar is one of our two main units of account. We've separated from England let's just make the dollar our main unit of account. So when we say worthless as a continental, what we mean is worthless as a continental note from the Continental Congress promising $1. And they were worthless because they didn't ever deliver dollars. In fact, at the end, they were traded at what? 2 cents on the dollar or something like that, because the note was faulty. That note was a bill of credit. That's one reason in our current Constitution why we so almost unanimously said no more bills of credit. No state, no Congress can issue bills of credit because it never honors them. The temptation is too great to make more promises than people will ever give you in taxes. That's why we made that unlawful. That's why Congress never issued any bills of credit after that until the Civil War under Secretary of the Treasury Chase. And guess what? He later got elevated to Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and some people sued after the war. This is a remarkable thing. This never happens. Public servants publicly admit that they broke the law. But as Chief Justice in a court opinion, he acknowledged, no, this was never lawful. And he's acknowledging that I was the Treasury Secretary trying to talk Congress into doing it, but we were in duress. But it's not lawful, never has been lawful. And Congress never tried to do that again until 1913, when the Federal Reserve Act started encouraging the Federal Reserve banks to do it, and Congress had the chutzpah to call those notes its obligations. So, was that a good answer? It was a long answer.
And we have exactly the same thing today.
Well, yes, again, but again, and it's not $1. It's a fraudulent note for $1. The dollar is what's passing around here. Who's got the dollar? That's $1. Federal Reserve note promises that. Now, it doesn't even promise it on its face anymore, but by statute it still does. But decades ago, they took the promise off the face of the note because they hadn't honored it. By statute, we actually passed a statute relieving the Federal Reserve banks of the duty to honor their notes. And because we had previously unlawfully called the United States the guarantor of those notes, called them our obligations, we had passed an act saying we will never fulfill this. Okay? So it's a worthless promise from people of no faith, of no faithful people who are worse than highway bandits, but it's not $1. Okay? It's a note for $1. And the fact that it's been able to usurp the name is a large part of its success in impoverishing the entire world and enslaving a nation. But again, with so many things, we can step by step, all at once, or just little things. You mentioned property taxes. A man in Colorado 10 years ago proposed this to his county commissioners. And I don't know where they are with it, but I've been wanting to propose it to our county treasurer. His name is Craig McAllister, and he's a good man. But I have to have time to explain it to him because I'm sure it'll blow him away. But people have since, what was it, Proposition 13 in the 70s in California? Was that when that was? Ever since at least the 70s, property owners around the country where they have property taxes have been up in arms because they have the same doggone house they've always had, but because the Fed keeps issuing more Federal Reserve notes, it costs the price of that house in Federal Reserve notes has gone up 5 times. Therefore, his tax appraisal has gone up 5 times. Therefore, he has to pay 5 times as many Federal Reserve notes in property taxes in the same doggone house that, by the way, the roof is leaking. Okay, but I suggest the solution to that is, hey, County Council, how about you pass an ordinance saying property owners, if you have a property tax in your county, and many do, ours does, how about proposing an ordinance saying every property owner has a choice? From here on out, I want my house appraised in dollars, not Federal Reserve notes, and therefore I want my property taxes assessed by a fixed rate in dollars. Somebody else wants to keep having his house appraised in Federal Reserve notes because every year it's worth more. I bought my house here in August of 2020, and within the next year, it cost 3 times as much, on Zillow at least, in Federal Reserve notes. Do you think the house improved that much? No. Part of it was influx of people, but most of it was Fed has been printing Federal Reserve notes like crazy. So if I as a property owner had that choice by ordinance of the county, I would say, I prefer to have my house assessed every year in real dollars. And if you keep charging the same percent, I won't pay any more in taxes next year than I have for 10, 20 years on. But my poor neighbor, he's going to be paying a bigger percentage in taxes, or in real terms. He's going to be paying more and more every year in real terms, even though the percentage is the same. The poor guy, if he's on a fixed income, he's screwed. Or you can say, we in the state of Utah will just begin collecting our tobacco taxes in real dollars. Or we will amend our Judiciary Act to say that all court judgments awarded will be awarded in real constitutional dollars of the United States unless the plaintiff prefers otherwise. Always leave it to the people who have choice. Or we now will pay our state employees. How many are there? I don't know, 100,000? I don't know how many. There's too many Utah state employees. We're going to now pay them in real dollars, not Federal Reserve notes. They'll get the same amount. They won't get a raise every year, but they'll get the same amount of wealth every year. What is needed is a large, and again, we talked about circulation. What makes something current? It's circulated widely. Why does the Federal Reserve note circulate? Because the hugest economic player in the United States, and probably the hugest economic player in the world, the government of the United States, demands them. That's why people use them, because everybody has to pay them. So a state is much smaller, but still significant. A state is a pump. If the state demands or a state pays out a certain amount of real dollars, that puts them into circulation, and that is the one thing that will have more and more people owning them, saving them, spending them, and when the disaster comes, everybody will have some real wealth. The more the better. Does that make sense? No? Yes? Question? Other question? Yes, sir.
So what you're saying, the real dollar is the silver coin.
Yeah. And the Constitution and all of our statutes are explicit about that. Okay, and that's why, but this is, I challenge everybody to read Edwin Vieira's book. Don't put that off. Oh, I don't know, I've never read a 1,700-page book. Well, how much is the possibility of ever having a free country again worth to you? I spent 30 years in the Navy, willing to die for my oath to the Constitution of the United States. I was never so much as fired upon. But then I have to ask myself, there are a million men before me in the uniform who did pay that price. How much time am I willing to spend reading, learning, understanding? The reason why it's important to master that is Edwin is so, I called it Prussian thoroughness. He's so thorough. His mind works like no mind I know since the 19th century. There were lots of minds like that in the 17th and 18th centuries, and a few in the 19th. But we're a post-literate society. We're a post-literate civilization. What John Quincy Adams at 16 had to do to get into Harvard in his 2-week examination, very, 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 very few Harvard PhDs could pass today. Again, we're generations past literacy, but we all still know how to read. God bless us. We know how to read, and by the way, his prose is lucid. Lucid as the noonday sun. His prose is amazing, and a dry irony in it that is amazing. And he speaks 6 or 7 languages very well, from what I can ascertain, because I'm fluent in German and Russian and English, and he uses them very well. He doesn't pronounce his German and Russian correctly, but his usage is impeccable. But he also speaks Latin, Greek, Italian, Portuguese. I mean, the guy's amazing. His prose is amazing, but he builds a foundation that sees the end from the beginning and builds it in such a way that every gainsayer, every attack that you will ever encounter, and you will attack it, you already know the answer to in its full context. That's why we need to master it. Again, I'm almost through the second time through, and I'm by no means a master, but I've mastered it more than anyone in my acquaintance. Again, I annotate it, because everything you read is going to undo some unconscious false understanding of something. You won't believe how much we have inherited of misapprehensions. But you will find out by reading, and again, he cites everything, 6,500 citations. And you go there and you find it. Vocabulary. I think I have a big vocabulary because I'm a big reader since I was a boy. He uses words that I've never seen in my life, And then I look them up, and I find out that this word was invented only for one instance in 20 years. That was that instance right there. Again, he's got a mind like nobody's that I know. And a fun sense of humor, like I said, kind of a dry sense of humor. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the I think it was the French dollar, the Dix, that got the name Dixie?
No.
Okay.
No, when was it issued?
Well, it was issued by a bank, I think, in New Orleans.
Oh,
It
because of the
spread
French
through
connection?
it spread, yeah.
Oh,
it
because of
spread
the French
through-
connection. Then what, was it after the secession, or was it earlier? Or? Yeah, I'm not
I
familiar
think
with
it
that
was
at all.
Earlier, but it was popular apparently in the agricultural
In the
regions
agricultural regions,
in the north of there.
because it was issued by this Louisiana bank.
Bank, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it was backed by actual money.
Yeah,
actual
yeah,
silver
yeah,
coin.
yeah. No, I'm going to have to look that up. That's fascinating.
Anyway, I think that's how the name Dixie came about. For,
Okay,
For the South.
okay. Samuel, I bet you have a question.
I have a lot of questions. I don't think we have time.
Okay. Well, again, this is a 6-hour lecture that it's like Dolly Parton once said, my mother told me not to try to pack 10 pounds of sand in a 5-pound bag, and that's what I'm trying to do. So forgive me. This really needs more time. I've sort of, but if you ask me for, and I give you the PowerPoint, and you go through it slowly, and you look at everything, you can unpack it, and it all makes sense, I promise you. And he'll give you my contacts if you want to have more explication. But really, it is hard to get pieces of 8 today. It's hard to get it, but you can get it. And you got to get this blue edition. There was an early edition that was much less thorough in scope. You must get the Gold Money edition, which is this big 2-volume blue edition, 1,700 pages, because it's so comprehensive. This is, again, I make no exaggeration when I say 500 years after the Lord has returned in glory, it will still be the standard work on this subject. God bless him. By the way, he wrote the standard work on our militia institutions and the Constitution, and that one's like 3,500 pages. But again, it will be the standard work for 500 years, because there's nothing that's been missed, it's just phenomenal intellectual work of a mind that I wish we had more of. Yes, sir?
Forgot to tell everybody what we need to do, though.
Okay, what you need,
We, the people,
need,
to hold Congress,
we need to do 2 things.
politicians accountable.
But we, if you're Idahoan or Utah, it looks like we have Idahoans on one. Well, we don't. We have Idahoans and Utahns on both sides. If you're a Utahn or if you're an Idahoan, memorize, it's only 5 or 6 of them, the monetary clauses of the Constitution. Easy. Joanne, when you were little, didn't you memorize Evangeline or Hiawatha or something of thousands of lines? I know people your age did, because my mother did. My mother, she memorized Evangeline. That's what, I forget how many thousands of lines. And Hiawatha's twice as many. People used to do that. People have been memorizing for thousands of years. And if something is brilliantly written, it's actually very easy to memorize. If you try to memorize the phone book or a talk by your state legislator, you can't. Why? Because it doesn't have a perfect rhetorical architectural structure. But if you try to memorize the Declaration, it's easy as pie. I did it decades ago. Why is it easy as pie? Because it's written with such a masterful rhetorical architecture. There's not one preposition that is chosen carelessly. So you see the order in the whole thing. Constitution's the same way. There's not so much as a preposition used carelessly. Of here for a reason, for there for a reason, from here for a reason. And as you read it, you see the reason. Oh yeah, okay, I see, okay, yeah, I see. The reason is in the words. It's in the structure, because it's created by great minds. And we don't have too many people that are that literate today, and so it's harder to memorize things. But if you read something like that, it's easy. Or a poem, a masterful poem like Hiawatha, thousands of lines, but anybody can memorize it with time, because the structure itself tells you what comes where and next, So yeah, you can do that. So first step, each of us needs to memorize the monetary clauses of the Constitution. Again, I showed you what they were. Next, each of us needs to master Edwin's book. Really. I know that sounds, no. it will be one of the most thrilling adventures of your lifetime, and it will change your life, change all your paradigms about one of the 2 or 3 most important parts of our Constitution that has been blatantly violated for 100 years now and is destroying the world and its freedom. So is it worth doing that? Yeah, it is. And then third, explore some ways that your county council or your state legislature can do things step by step to increasingly reintroduce the real dollar into circulation and to make people understand that it is, so that pump circulates it and now we all own it. Do you know what happened in, was it the first couple of months of FDR's first term as president, right? He stole everybody's gold and silver coins, right? He demanded, as though he were king, that everybody turn them in to the Treasury or one of the Federal Reserve banks. You know what? I don't know how many, but I think most people complied. You know why they did? Because most people were used to using notes and exchanging notes. But I can promise you, most of Americans had quite a few real dollars and quite a few real gold eagles in their actual possession, when he decreed that, they would have marched on Congress and insisted on the man's impeachment and wished that they could have hanged him. But they didn't, because they were relatively few. So the safety is in lots of pockets, preferably most pockets, and most homes having lots of real dollars and gold eagles in their physical possession that they exchange with people all the time. If that happens now, the next time a president or a Congress tries to seize everybody's real money, we'll tell them to take a hike, because we'll have strength in numbers. And it's the physical, or it's the intellectual strength of awareness. Many people, even in the early 1930s, were used to thinking that this piece of paper was $1. They were already believing that. And so, but if everybody knew and used it, that would be an intellectual. And the intellectual self-defense is more important than an armed self-defense. Intellectual self-defense comes before armed self-defense, comes before suing somebody, comes before anything else. The confidence that you know, and you know how you know and why, and you can withstand any sophistic attack, which is all you're going to get in anywhere in the press or in school. That's the first self-defense, intellectual understanding. So those 3 things: memorize those clauses, attack Edwin's book, start mastering it, and start talking to your county council and your state legislators right now. But hey, what can you do right now to not haphazardly? I showed some imperatives. This is how the state has to go about it. If the states don't go about it that way, they're just going to walk into a trap. They need to explicitly stand on the Constitution and statute, explicitly acknowledge where they have violated their oaths in the past and the harm it's caused, and we're explicitly repenting, and we're not going to do that. We're going to start doing right here, here, and here. And this is why you can start a wonderful healing revolution in, again, the monetary aspect is one of the most important aspects of our civic order. Edwin always says the purse and the sword, those are the 2 aspects of whether we're really a self-governing people or not. If we control the purse and we control the sword, if we have real money in our possession and we exercise our militia duties, which we don't, then we have the purse and the sword, and we are self-governing again. Thank you. So go to constitutionalmilitia.org, and you will find short writings to book-length writings to interviews to videos to everything, all by Edwin Vieira. He calls it constitutionalmilitia.org because he first started posting a lot of the writings that he's done about why we need to repent and fulfill our militia duties and the constitutional functioning of how that's supposed to work. But he's also filled it with monetary stuff. So you can get that book there, and it's getting to be the only place where you can buy it. Constitutionalmilitia.org. Again, when I bought mine 2011, I think, you just get it on Amazon. And you can still get some of his books on Amazon. Is that what you found one? Yeah. And it's well worth it. $800, that's easily worth it. But I paid something like $100. I don't remember what I paid, but it was, a normal price for 2 fat law school books. textbooks, you know. People are paying thousands for it because they know it's worth it. But if you go to his website, then you can get it for a decent price. You know, you can still get it from him. Do you know R.J. Donnelly down in Logan? It's a publishing company that actually does the physical printing of the books and the binding of the books. They do it. They do it for him. You know, many people today, when they publish a book, they skip the middleman and just hire the company. As I get orders, make me this many and send them out. You know, and that's what R.J. Donnelly in Logan does, if I'm not misinformed.
All right, thank you.
I have a
Oh, can we spell Vieira for him, in case they don't know how to spell Vieira? Yeah. Okay. All four of Edwin's grandparents came from the Azores, Portugal, and moved to Rhode Island. So his is a Portuguese name, Vieira. 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 That's turns out to be a pretty common name in the Azores.
We have some friends in Columbus with the last name Vieira.
Yeah, that's a good